yummy, rumbly chest. Blech. I'll be ready to go in just a minute or two here. A little behind the 8 ball this morning. Well, hello there. It's Thursday, September 19th. I'm Rob, that developer dad, and today we are going to be doing some minor refactoring between the front-end API and the front end so that I can bring back more than one thing from some of these calls that the UI is making to the back-end systems as users perform different activities in the Blazor application itself. So as soon as Visual Studio finishes loading, we will dive into that. All right, so I think we're going to make our change inside the character workloads, that BFF API construct that we have. Now, this API, I have it labeled as Game Tools API Workload Provider. That's the name of the C# project. And we've got an AI workloads, and what that does is it defines our some of the data types that are passed between this API and the front end project. It also defines the behaviors that this API provides to the front end project. So I'm going to need to add a new folder, and I'm going to create something called API models. And just to avoid the Smurf typing, I'm just going to call it models. Now right now we have 2 scenarios in which we're sending a request into the API, and we need to bring back multiple objects as part of that response. Now, I've already got the OpResult declared over in the framework library, but I don't want to mutate that for this particular scenario. And I want the 2 objects that I'm bringing back to actually be typed. So I'm going to flip over to the screen share because I just realized that I didn't do that. Here we are. So here's my brand new models. And I'm going to add a class called the describe now. What this class is actually doing is carrying back the updated quotas and some return type, some business object, or not business object, but some data object that's relevant to performing something in the application. So I'm going to call this quoted response quoted result. I like that better. And we're going to make it public because we're going to be exchanging it with the front end project. And it is going to be of T, where T is a class. Excuse me. And public user quotas. No, I don't want to use the resource model. I got to look up what those return types are going to be. I know one of them is going to be a T, public T, nullable, result, get set, and then we're going to have another property on there, and I can't remember what it is. So I got to go look at the managers, and we'll look at the user manager in the contract, and it's a quota container. That's right. Updated quotas, get set. There we go. And I'm going to make it nullable. And I don't like the quoted result. That's really awkward word. Rename quoted result to, oh gosh, what are we going to call it? Consumption, consumed, limited. None of those are really, really great. It's the result with the updated resource limits. Resource. There. Yes, I like that. Updated quotas and resource result. Use this as the OpResult payload when an operation changes a user's quotas for one or more limited resources. The updated quota container should be placed in the updated quotas property, the actual application object, the actual application type that is returned, expected should go into the result property. All right, and both of those are nullable properties, so I'm not even going to bother with a constructor. This is just a container. Excuse me. I'm getting really, really sick of this chest nastiness. It's making me crazy. All right, let's remove and sort these usings just while that's up on screen. Now, generate NPC, describe NPC as being deprecated. Let's find the right one to use. This looks like it. So generated character properties and save NPC. So this is becoming a task of OpResult. Yeah, I really should align that. OpResult of resource result of generated character properties. There we go. There's that. This is becoming an OpResult that contains a resource result of townsperson. And I really should have done these one at a time, but heck with it. All right, so we've updated our interface. And now I got to come out to character workloads. We'll do save NPC. Resource result of townsperson. And we need to add the reference. There we go. Here's new character, NPC, blah, 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 blah. And I actually need to create the return type now. Resource result of townsperson. And resource result equals new. One of those. OpResult of resource result townsperson is null. And here's where we try. And I pull all of this stuff up in here. And I add a catch. And I'm going to change this to API result. And it's not going to be null. It's going to be a new one of those. There we go. And API result dot payload equals resource result, and we're going to return the API result. GUID exception ID equals GUID not empty but new. Come on, Rob. New GUID. String message equals there was a problem saving the NPC for user ID. There we go. logger dot log error exception, and the GUID as a string. And API result dot add error EXID and the message. Okay. So manager result equals NPC manager.save townsperson. If his new character, we're going to do that. And quota update, I'm going to need to declare that. Oh, I'll manage that in here. So var, not var, but resource result dot result. I need to check for success first. If manager result dot was successful, this moves up in here. We're only going to increment the quota if the save op was successful. Else, manager result dot copy errors to ref API result. There we go. Resource result dot result equals manager result dot payload. Cool. And then down here, resource result dot user updated quotas equals quota update dot payload. Save that. Take a sip of coffee. And then we just apply this same pattern up in the code that is taking care of the AI call. So up in here, this is becoming a task of OpResult with resource result of type generated character properties. Boop, boop. All right. And that should get rid of my does not implement interface, and that's good. So I need, excuse me, I need to create an OpResult of resource result of generated character properties. We're going to call it API result equals new OpResult. What's this complaining about? Is it just because I've got a space there? This thing's being very, very silly. I guess I have to push this up onto the prior line, or the compiler is just going to be really, really confused. make it a var. I hate doing that, but I'm going to make it a var. And then what I'll do, just because I know what it's going to be. Oh, I had too many things. That's my problem. Whenever I know what a thing is going to be, I'm going to define the thing. Resource result of type generated character properties API payload equals a new one of those, and do I have any of this stuff in a try catch or anything like that? No, I don't. So we're not going to return character attributes. We're going to return API result. And I'm going to say API result dot payload equals API payload. All right. Now I am going to try catch exception EX and GUID exception ID equals GUID.new GUID string message equals could not generate the AI provided details. Create the AI generated details for user ID. And I need to add the interpolation token. There we go. Logger, log error, exception, the ID as a string. There we go. And API result dot add error, exit message, boop. Now I gotta grab all of this from here all the way down to here. Nope. All the way down to here. Cut that. Paste it into my try. And result payload, AI manager payload. It does all the things. It's doing all the setup. So character attributes. Character attributes equals parse from JSON. I need to come up here and say API payload. Yep, that's what gets that. So after we have gotten our character attributes, we API payload dot result equals character attributes. Okay, this is all good. Consume quota async var quota update result equals. All right. And then come out to the end here. And I say API payload dot user updated quotas equals quota update result dot payload oh duh, there's not a method. Here we go. And if quota update result dot was successful equals false. Fix the spelling. I will quota update result dot add errors to, not add errors to, but copy ref API result I don't know what this AI JSON equals string.empty is for. Excuse me. But we don't need to worry about that. I can do AI manager result. Copy errors to ref API result. And those will fall out to the UI as well. And any exceptions that get thrown, we'll catch them here. And we fall out here, and we're good. Now I need to come into the NPC service proxy because it is no longer talking to the correct stuff. Oh, that's dead green code. We can get rid of that. So var API result equals await NPC API dot generate attributes. I believe that's everything we need to pass. Nope. NPC dot owner ID. There we go. Gen AI attributes. That code is kind of crappy, but it's not as crappy as it was. I can get rid of that. Burp! Need to apply the properties. Get rid of that. And if API result dot was successful, let me think. If API result dot payload dot result is not equal to null, We need to declare updated ahead of that conditional. All right. And instead of doing this, I'm going to do this. Okay. And I'm going to make that nullable. I'm going to pull this up here. API result will absolutely not be null. But just to be for sure. And the payload, it might be null. If gen AI attributes is not equal to null. Paste. So there we go. We're handling that. Now, I should also change this to a, instead of an NPC client model, because it's not going to be the service proxy's responsibility to notify the app context container. Or, oh, here's a thought. Yeah, I'm going to pass the application context. That's what I'm going to do. Instead of all of this quota ID stuff and everything like that, I'm going to just pass the app context or the app state. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. So to do that, I'm going to need to pull this out of the parameter list, put it here. We'll terminate that line here. And then the app context, app CTX, doesn't like app context. Oh, that's system.appContext. I have the wrong type on that. Give me a second. I think it's context container. App CTX. Equals app CTX dot get Z. Rob, come on. I'm going to pop back to where I'm calling this. Come on. You can do it. You probably won't be able to find it. Create NPC page model. Get AI description. That's what I want to do. Instead of passing the user limits, I'm going to want to grab this stuff. Actually, I don't even need that here. I'm just going to pass the whole bloody app context. There. So there's that. That goes in here. I come up to the service proxy. And I paste that there. No, I don't. I pull my head out of my butt. And use the variable name. How about that? There, I'll pass the app state provider. Duh. Equals user limits dot AI. Excuse me. Dot quota ID. Yay, COVID. Love it. Ugh. Golly. All right. So our generate attributes call happens. We should get that API result is there. It does all those things. Var updated quotas equals API result dot payload dot updated quotas, and we'll give some nullability stuff here. Updated quotas. If updated quotas is not null, app context dot set user limits. Oh, I need to translate that. Var user limits equals updated quotas dot something. I need that translation code I wrote yesterday. And that would be down here somewhere. Okay. I can in services add mapping extensions. add class. Quota mapping. We'll make this guy internal, static, public, static, user limits model as UI model, this quota container, API model. Now let's come over to NPC service proxy. Grab this, copy it, paste this code in here, and now we're going to start refactoring it. Var, no, user limits model, UI model equals API model. I'm going to do a trick here. Payload. Now I'll rename this to API model. There we go. This goes back to proxy payload. All right. And rename that to UI model. Cool. Everything's still good. And the very end, I return the UI model. Now we've got a handy dandy little extension method for that mapping. API payload, proxy payload equals API payload dot to UI model. And this just needs did I say as UI model? Yep. I need to go rename that. Rename to. Save it. And back to the NPC service proxy. Where was I? To UI model. That is a thing of beauty. Okay. That's much, much nicer to read than all of that ugly mapping code. And I get to use it up here as well. We'll come back to save NPC, app context, set user limits. User limits equals updated quotas dot to UI model. Boop. Excuse me. UI quotas. UI quotas. That's that. App context better not be null. And that should be all we need to do here. We're going to have a boatload of testing to do in a minute. But I do want to, this pattern, it's not really well illustrated here in Get AI description because I'm doing an awful lot of stuff in this method. Really not in love with the way that's shaken out, but we're going to have some messy code somewhere, and I'd like to limit the places that we've got that messy code. So townsperson API result.payload .result. All right, so that fixes that. Hey, what's up, Erkamus? I'm just working in a pattern that's going to let me return multiple results from a call that I'm making, because I'm not ready to introduce event handling to this thing yet. My API, the character workloads class that's acting as an API, it's combining both the business operation of sending the NPC to get the AI generated details and updating the quotas and stuff like that, because I don't want to be calling from the web server client out to the different services. I mean, yes, it's all in a monolith right now, but eventually I may pull the usage into its own service, the D&D related stuff into its own service, and the AI thing into its own service. And I don't want to have like the call chain that looks like the glove of doom. So what I'm doing is I'm consolidating the calls to all of the subsystems for this thing into a single point of call, and then the UI will only ever have to say, my user wants to generate the AI description, my user wants to save the NPC, my user wants to do this to this API layer, the character workloads. And then the character workloads is what knows, okay, well, the user wants to do this, so we're going to have to do this, then we do this, then we do this, and then we're going to send the results of all of those operations back. So I'm kind of abusing my result object pattern here. I created a resource result that composes the updated quota with the actual result of the operation. And passes that back. So now I'm just switching around how the system deals with those. Well, a function can have exactly 1 or 0 result types, unless you're throwing an exception. And I don't like to throw exceptions unless except for in very special cases, because just randomly throwing exceptions, it muddies up the call stack, and it does bad things to the runtime's memory space, and can really torch your performance. So let's see here. We're at the NPC service proxy. We're getting the proxy result. I made the change where instead of passing the user storage quota ID, I'm declaring that as a variable inside here. And the parameter that I'm passing is the app state provider that I created the other day. Excuse me. Equals, no, var user quotas equals app context dot get user limits, boop, equals user quotas, get user limits. I do need to await that just in case. I think I can go true. Nope. user quotas equals await app context dot get user limits, user quotas dot storage dot quota ID. Okay. Now the API payload. So if API result was successful, we're mapping the payload and setting that. API result dot copy errors to ref proxy result. Okay. Pardon me. Proxy result dot payload equals proxy payload, and if API payload dot not API payload, API result dot payload dot updated quotas is not equal to null. And I'm going to do a var result quotas equals that. Terminate that line and give it some null forgivings. I'm going to say app context dot set user limits result quotas dot to UI model. To UI model is a it's an extension method that I created just before you popped in. Var UI limits equals result quotas dot to UI model, and I can use the null forgiving operator there, that exclamation point, because we won't be executing this code if result quotas is null. Excuse me. Man, I can't wait until I'm done with this Rona nonsense. And all of this stuff that I just did should result in me being able to update these quotas in my application context after these operations complete. So I'm going to drop breakpoints. Actually, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all my breakpoints. Yep. And I'm going to set one here. I like extension methods because they're really nice and tidy. I'll show you. So yesterday when we had, or when I came down here to map the updated, or the user quotas from the system's model of user quotas to the UI's model of user quotas, this code was hideous. In fact, I'll compare with unmodified here. And I'm going to spin all the way down to the bottom here, and I'll see if I can zero in. So all of this ugly goo, I collapsed it up into this extension method, to UI model. Now, I didn't have to, and I didn't yesterday because my only problem with this code is that it's ugly, but I needed to be able to translate a system representation of the user quotas into the UI representation of user quotas in a different part of my class this morning. So rather than copy and paste this code, I just created a mapper class right inside my Blazor apps services folder where I'm keeping the all of the stuff that deals with the Blazor application calling to the backend systems. And I've got all of the local UI models here. And in here is where I move that map code that accepts quota container, which is the API model, and translates it into the user limits model, which is the UI model, and then returns that. So rather than having all this ugly crap out in the actual service proxy class, it's been condensed down to a single function call on the donor instance. So it's preferable for me. An extension method means I don't need to instantiate a translator class. If I hadn't done this as an extension method and instead created a translator, like a type mapper class type thing, I would need to instantiate the type mapper and then pass in both the donor and the target instances, or pass in the donor instance, and I would have had to go like type mapper dot convert system quota to UI quota, and then I'd need another one that's like convert UI quota to system quota, and it'd just get really, really wordy. And using an extension method, which allows me, because of this keyword on quota on the first parameter in extension method, it essentially allows you to say instance dot. So in C#, anytime you see toString, there's a lot of use of extension methods in LINQ. Those are that extension method pattern. And I use extension methods a lot, especially for type mapping. So I've got my breakpoints here, and I think I just want to test these things and make sure my quotas are getting updated and that the actual business activities or the actual application activities are still executing as I expect them to be. So let's run this, and we're going to give it a little kick and see what happens. And I've got some build errors, so my tests immediately fail. Oh, that's right, because I didn't pass the right thing. So I just need to pass the app context. There we go. And I likely need to come over here. Yep. And I just need to pass the app context. Save that. Okay, now let's try it. That I am going to bookmark for deletion because I don't need it anymore. All right, let's sign in. That type mapper class, like if you do it as a non-static class available to the global scope, it can get really messy really fast. I prefer to do my type mapping as extension methods like I showed you. But what I like to do is do them as internal static classes So they're only visible within the same project or assembly, because I don't want my UI project or my UI assembly to even have knowledge of the inner details of, say, the assembly or the project that deals with the SQL database storage. I don't want those two talking directly to each other. And I don't want the UI to have knowledge of what's going on in the database layer. I just want things to only be aware of the public contracts on the next layer down the stack. Okay, this is going to fail first try because the database went to sleep, as it does. We're going to be starting to get into some resilience next, I think. Yeah, as long as you control scope, you save yourself an awful lot of pain. And scope control is more a matter of discipline within the team and code reviews. But that scope control, it needs to be part of the initial design. And if you don't have scope control between the logical layers of your system, and this goes for any system out there, if you're not controlling your scope, you're just opening yourself up to future pain and defects, weird defects that are hard to track down. All right, so let's generate, we'll generate this guy. Honestly, splitting things up into services, for me, it makes the individual pieces easier to reason about. Okay, here we go. I'll get back to this. I want to make sure everything is good. So we've got this, got my updated quota. It's bumped up by 1 from yesterday. That's good. And so we'll just continue there. And now I'll save my townsperson. And my result quotas, it should now be higher by 1. Good. And it is. And we'll carry on and go back to the list. And here's our elf tailor. Great. So this afternoon, I'm going to take that quota information, and I think I'm going to put a little bit of info right down here about how many stored NPCs we have. And then I think over here on the generate AI description, I might inject a little bit of text about how many AI generations have been used against my end user's monthly quota. Or perhaps I'll put it down here, make it a little bit more friendly, because when we are in a mobile view, when we're on a mobile view, it's a little less, we've got a little less space to work with, and I don't want to make those buttons get taller, because that's a crappy experience. Okay, so back to your question. Part of the reason for splitting things up into services. I come from a school of thought that services are used to define, it's fairly accepted thinking that services define boundaries around code and the functionality that code provides. We can all agree on that. Some people like to organize their systems into services that express the domain of the business or problem that they're solving. Some folks like to express those services or use those services to express the areas of change. And it's not just change in requirements over time, but it's also change in how that service is consumed by any of its potential clients. So you've got two vectors of volatility. We've got change over time and change over consumption. I call that sigma and delta. So delta is change over time, sigma is change via consumption pattern. And we want to design our services so that they encapsulate exactly one of those change vectors. If you have a service that's widely consumed and materially changes frequently over a span of time, then you're signing yourself up for a bad time. Because every time that service changes materially, you have to change all of its consumers. So think about a system for a highly regulated industry like banking, healthcare, gambling, whatever. The user interface isn't going to change all that often. Like, we might have to add some new fields. We might have to, improve the security of logging in and stuff like that. But really, the UI, it's just there to show information to the people that are signed in and collect information from the people that are signed in. And its role in the whole system really doesn't change all that much. Now, your transaction processing services, as regulations change, as business needs change, as security posture changes, those transaction processing services are going to change an awful lot. Now, if you have one stack of functionality or one stack of capability that's going to change often, and every time something in there changes, everything else in that same stack has to change, that's a good candidate for putting into a service, so that you can make changes to it, version it, deploy it completely independently of the rest of the system around it. Make sense? So, like, that's probably my main reason for splitting things into services. Another reason to split something out into its own logical service is, when you start building a new application or a new system, it's probably in your best interests to not chase microservices or not chase a distributed deployment, because that brings a lot of complexity and a lot of cost that you don't really know that you need yet. So what I prefer to do in those cases is create what I call a well-factored monolith. And let's see here. I'll just do this. Do it this way. So we've got our application, right? And the modern trend, so we've got this, and then we'll have services. And as time goes by, it's like, oh, we need a new capability. Great, we'll just add another service to it. And then eventually it just becomes this big tangled mess of nonsense. And every time you add one of these guys, you're adding hosting costs, you're adding cognitive costs, you're adding tracking, storage, monitoring. Oh God, the monitoring. And it's just going to take your cloud spend and it's going to explode it needlessly. Similarly, if we just go this route, where we've got, this is the whole bloody application, and we're just going to keep adding code in here as time goes by, you eventually end up with the code inside it being a big spaghetti mess of yuck. And making changes over here are going to have side effects over here, and it's going to get just more and more time consuming and more expensive, because you're going to have to hire an army of developers that are very, very, very careful and only ever make tiny changes. And it's going to increase your cycle time from I need a change made to here's that change you made to an unacceptable level. And you're going to be paying out the nose for all of the people required to make the changes and then test the changes. And deploying this thing, you have no choice but to tear the whole system down and rebuild it in the production environment from the ground up every time you make a little change. God forbid somebody spell the caption on a button wrong, because if that happens, you're either living with that spelling error, or you have to tear the whole system down and put it back up again, and everybody has to stay late and keep their fingers crossed that nothing goes wrong during deployment and blah, blah, blah. And that sucks too. That sucks a lot. As a matter of fact, this concept came out as a backlash to this concept from like the 80s and 90s. And yeah, I've been there too. I've created these. I'm not proud of it. I was very young in my career when I created these. I was slightly less young when I created these messes. And what I've come to appreciate is the beauty that comes with constrained mindful complexity. And what I've come to refer to just within the past 4 months while I've been unemployed, I got laid off. It was budget nonsense. All praise the shareholders. The shareholders thank me for my sacrifice. We'll get to that question in a second, Erskimus. That is a valuable, important question. So what I've started to favor in my design methodology is the big rectangle, but within that big rectangle, now this big rectangle isn't necessarily a single project, but a system. So we've got our UI layer, and I'm going to change the fill on this to green. And then behind the UI layer, I'm going to change this to yellow or a light orange. And then behind here, and you know what? I'm going to shrink the top down just a scooch. And I'm going to do this to suggest that our green is visible outside of our system. And in fact, I'm going to pull this up here. Now I'm going to take this, and instead of doing this, we're going to go like so. And I'm going to change this to a darker orange. And we're just going to do this like so. And then down here on the bottom, we've got different kinds of resources. We might have a database under this guy. And let's make you a nice bright blue. And we'll put another database over here. And we might have some happy little clouds over here. And we might have a file system. What can I use as a file system? Here we go. We might have some files under this guy. And every happy little cloud needs a friend. I love Bob Ross. He has become one of my role models. And so, strangely enough, inside each one of these, which is our services, the architecture and organization of the code inside each of these services pretty much looks exactly like this whole. You'll have a public interface. You'll have the expected input and output types sticking out of the top of these guys. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. Boop. And then, just give me, come on, Rob. There we go. I was going to grab one of these. So there's the public types. And what color do I want to make that? I think I'll make that that green. So there's the public type on your service. And then it's got, your logic layer in here. And then if it needs to call down, it's got more translation that's able to translate between its internal idiomatic representation of the concepts it's dealing with and the next layer down. And so reference always and only moves down. These guys never talk side to side. Never, ever, ever speak directly to each other. If you need these services to communicate, communication may be one way and one way only, and uses a bus. That's not listed here. Now, the benefit to this is, let's say I discover that this service is spending or is consuming more system resources than all of the other ones combined. And I want to be able to have multiple copies of this guy. Well, all I do is fracture him out into his own hosting environment. Send it back. There we go. And we'll pull this over here. I'll pull this over here. And then instead of a direct project reference from my API into these guys, I stand up a service proxy and make a network call. And that's it. But I only do this when I know this service is using a lot of resources, or it's being deployed more frequently than everything else, or some combination of the two. Or I might discover that the capabilities provided by this service are needed by other applications, and I don't want those applications to have to call into this, and I certainly don't want to have to stand up multiples of these or what have you necessarily. Sometimes you might have like a web client and a native installable application client, that's fine. But if I've got let's say this is my financial transaction processor, or it's responsible for talking to bank accounts, and I've got a banking app over here and an online shopping app over here. I don't want to give the online shopping app access to the backend API for the whole banking app, but I do want to give the online shopping app the ability to make requests into my transaction processor. So I would separate it out, protect it, give it its own security posture, and then it's just HTTP calls or network calls, could be HTTP, gRPC, whatever, from application into hosted service. Now, are there some questions you can ask about a potential service so you can determine how volatile it might be? Or does it just come down to experience, trial, and error? And the answer to that question is yes, both of those things. You'll get better at identifying volatility with practice, but the good news, bad news, depending on your personality type, is you'll chase out what those volatilities might be during the interviewing process while you're talking with the people that are requesting your system be built or modified. There's some pretty standard volatilities that are out in the world. Incoming data goes into like a feed volatility kind of thing. You'll have there's a whole discussion on an architect's forum about canonical volatilities that I've been ignoring, and I really ought to read up on it. But if you really want to get into thinking in terms of designing for change resiliency, there's a book I've read by the guy that taught me architecture. And I'm just going to put the name of the book right in the chat. And great book about architecture. It's called Writing Software by Yuval Lowy. And there's umlauts over that O. And it's not Duval, it's Yuval with a J. Very smart guy. He's the guy that Microsoft architects call when they're stumped, in a lot of cases. And he's sort of the father of, or not the father of, but he's sort of the head propagandist for this style of thinking about architecture. He tends to be a lot more extreme about it than I do. I still bring a little bit of pragmatism to it, because sometimes it doesn't always make sense to have everything as hard line in every case. I'm going to correct that assertion and say anytime I've flexed away from the advice in his methodology, I've always regretted it. So, yeah, it's really, really great book. And it talks in more depth and greater eloquence than I ever could about this particular topic. So, yeah, and I think September just linked the Goodreads link to it. I'm due for a reread. If I'm being honest with myself, I'm overdue for a reread of that one. But yeah, I'm a half hour over time. I'm going to be back at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to start showing, or we're going to work towards displaying these quota amounts in the UI of the Blazor application at that point, I think. And then it'll either be time to talk about adding some resiliency to this system so that, you know, if somebody comes in and the database is sleeping, it doesn't error out. It just takes a little longer and maybe provides some friendly messaging like, oops, looks like our database is sleeping. Please be patient. I'm waking it up, that kind of thing. Or I'm going to start listing the most egregious UI grossness that I can see in the application. My gut says let's stick in the C#. So I think we're going to take on resilience once I've got the quota stuff set up. And that's going to be getting into a new thing that was introduced with dotNet 8. They incorporated a lot of the ideas from the Poly package that deals with application resilience, retries, circuit breaker patterns, stuff like that. The only thing that I really want to think about in this case is the retries and perhaps a circuit breaker for a couple of the external resources. But I think we're just going to start with exponential retries with delay when remote resource calls fall over on us. So this has been a great discussion. Thanks for your questions, Erkamis. I really appreciate those. It gives me a chance to jump up on my soapbox and share some opinions, or perhaps share some of the knowledge that I've learned over the years and sort of explain myself in how I approach the way I do some things and why. So yeah, I really appreciate you hanging out. And if you can, I'll see you this afternoon. If not, I'll see you next time. And to everybody tuning in after the fact, happy coding. Take care of yourselves.